certain events have played for us to be as divided we are with values and principles today, and why he thinks it could be a civil war. It was interesting. We had a couple moments where we disagreed and agreed, but it will make for very, very good content for you. Again, don't let the first 35 minutes discourage you from listening to the last 45 minutes. You'll see why when you watch the entire thing. Having said that, here's Neil Howe, the author of The Fourth Turning.
Did you ever think you would make it? I feel so close I could take sweet victory. I know this life meant for me.
Look, let's get right into it. Because he definitely explains how there are certain characteristics that each generation take on due to either the prosperity or the downfall of a certain generation. So, trust me, it gets really interesting. Let's get right into it.
Through the first four turnings, up to another phase of life. And we have rising adults moving into midlife, midlifers moving into elderhood, and so on. So I'll give you a tour through the first four turnings, and then we can proceed. Sure. Let's look at what I think is most familiar to Americans on a long cycle, and that would be what happened after World War II. Historian William O'Neill called this the American high, right? This would have been the presidencies of Truman, Eisenhower, John Kennedy, 1946 to 63. Let's just think of it that way.
Americans' heyday.
It was an era when institutions were strong, individualism was weak, people had a strong consensus about where the nation should go. People in America felt like they were more that they were the sum of what they were was more than each part individually. In other words, in an aggregate, they mattered more than collective. Exactly. A sense of strong collective. People were modest.
So getting out of that nationalist perspective, like we are one people, and it got to, well, oh no, I'm my own person. Forget what y'all talking about.
About their individual
very selfish mindset,
talents or their individual rights, and everyone had a job to do. You were a boy in school, people said, go out and be a breadwinner. You were a girl, they said, be a homemaker. Everyone had a role to do. This is typical of a high. In fact, it's typical of every post-crisis generation. And the generation coming of age in that era was the silent generation. These were the kids who had been children in World War II and the Great Depression. This would have been, we have very few of them in politics left. Who remembers World War II still in politics? Joe Biden? Yeah, he remembers it. He's old enough. Mitch McConnell? That's about it.
And some would question whether they remember it or not, but because their current state. But that's
the problem is it maybe Ollie remembers it.
Yeah.
but that's another way of saying it. But my point is that shaped them. And these tend to be pretty conformist young people. We had universal conscription in the 1950s, and there wasn't a single kid who rebelled. Elvis Presley called into the army. Yes, sir. Shaved his hair, was off to Germany. I mean, the next generation, all that would change, right? Okay, so that's the high. Community strong, individualism was weak.
Okay.
The second turning is the awakening. And this is a time when the post-crisis generation is starting to come of age. There would be boomers in the latest case. By the way, I mentioned the second Great Awakening. That was a generation that was born and raised just after the Republic was founded. So you got the rhythm now. These are the kids raised in the peace, plenty, and orderly prosperity that came after the crisis.
Low chaos, not a lot of crisis.
Exactly.
It's chill.
Right.
Pretty peaceful. You can be creative if you want to. That's this phase.
Yeah, well, there's nothing. Yeah, you could be creative, but no one will allow you to do it, right? That's the problem. You have to be a member of the system, right? I mean, they have all this inner creativity born through all that stability and affluence, but they don't have there's no way to express it because you're supposed to be part of the system. So you have Mario Savio, free speech movement, 1964, saying we need to throw ourselves on the gears of the system. That famous speech on Sproul Plaza in UC Berkeley, to throw ourselves in the gears of the system to stop it, right? And that started this whole boomer awakening. That started this. What you do in an awakening is you want to throw off all the social conformity. You want to throw off all this overriding sense of community. We don't need to be building so much anymore.
Yeah, and that is where I believe we effed up at. I ain't gonna lie. I believe that's where we effed up at. The day we became more about the people became more about oneself instead of the community. That is where we went down a spiral of, well, perpetual degeneracy. And as soon as, I'm gonna be real, I couldn't frame this in my own community. As soon as there are people in my community, the black community, that start acting for themselves instead of acting for the good of the community, this is where we honestly start failing. When we start taking government handouts instead of rebuilding our family, this is where we start failing, because people looked out for themselves instead of what would be better for the community.
Your parents went through the crisis and they were programmed to just keep building and make institutions stronger. Why? Why? We don't no longer need it, Mom and Dad, right? So I think that in the most recent context, it started mainly on the left, on college campuses. It was, protesting the patriarchy and sex role divisions and how you dress and how you talked and all that stuff. But I think at the later end, in the 1970s, with Prop 13 and Reagan movement, it was more the right that got in on this. Cut our taxes, cut regulation. But here is what it all had in common, left and right. The individual should do whatever the hell he wants. We need this community. The boomers was raised at a time of maximum equality in terms of income and wealth. You look at the Gini coefficients, you look at any of the data, that's just when everyone agrees that we had the most maximum, income and wealth equality, late 60s. And they hated it, right? It was the strong middle class. It was these little boxes that all looked the same. Remember that Melvina Reynolds song? It was Pleasant Valley Sunday, charcoal burning everywhere. It's the boomers' worst nightmare. Why? Let people go their own way. I think boomers over their lifetime have been very accepting and indulgent of growing income inequality. I think that has been, every individual can do his or her own thing, right? And is
that a mindset of libertarianism, like the DNA of libertarian?
And it's not necessarily they wanted inequality. What they wanted was the freedom of every individual to choose whatever they wanted to do.
And do you know when the Libertarian Party got started? 1971.
Well, there you go, right in the middle of
Exactly. That's what I'm saying, which makes sense. Rob, did you see that? So Libertarian Party, if you look it up, 1971. Right.
But what you got is that boomers they didn't want defined benefit pension plans. Define contribution. Contribute if you want. Don't contribute if you don't. Everything should be your choice. And of course,
that non-interventionism is key right there.
Boomers end up, a lot of them didn't contribute. They borrowed against it. They never rolled it over. So all these boomers now are unprotected going into retirement. So it's had all these consequences, but the boomer ethos was the institution shouldn't be responsible for you. Just, everything would be okay if people had more freedom. And they really mastermind. I think most of the tirades against boomers have emphasized this. Most recently, I can't remember the author. It was that Exer Gibney, the guy who was one of the PayPal founders, one of the guys in California, wrote a book a couple of years ago called "The Generation of Sociopaths." I think one of the most, scathing screeds against boomers as a generation. He points this out, right? Boomers never wanted to work on continuing the community-oriented institutions that brought us together. They started the trend. Okay, so that's the awakening.
Okay.
Now, what's the third turning? The third turning is the unraveling. And that, in the most recent context, would have started in the mid-1980s. Morning Again in America probably gone all the way through to the GFC, the Great Financial Crisis, 2008. What was that era? Well, think about it. The high, banding together, building things, being a stronger community, took the lessons from the recent crisis, right? And everyone was scared. You got to circle your wagons. You got to, we might go back into a crisis. The awakening comes.
That's what kills me, though. It's like, so as soon as crisis was averted, we didn't learn the lesson of how great we are with community. But as soon as crisis is averted, everybody should start going off doing their own thing, being selfish. It's crazy.
And then the unraveling, you take the lessons of the recent awakening. What do you need to do to be happy and fulfilled? Be an individual, right? So the unraveling is sort of the maximum individualizing of American society. And that was when Gen X was coming of age, right? And Gen Xers were the ultimate throwaway generation as kids. I mean, they were individuals from the time they were 3. These were the first kids that people took pills not to have. They were alone at home. They were the alone at home generation, right? Yeah. And you can notice that the words that have followed Xers.
Because like my mom was a Gen Xer, and they're like, trust me, if your parents is a Gen Xer, I ain't gonna lie, you're probably one of the last few kids that were raised semi-right. Because like, the Gen Xers did a lot on their own. Like, bro, my mom had me staying home at like what, 7, 8 years old. It's like, bro, in today's time, bro, y'all still over here getting babysitter for y'all kids, and they're like 12. It's like, what are y'all doing? Did y'all not teach these niggas how to do anything? But yeah, that's how I know. Like, cause my mom's Gen X, and you could tell they kind of got this. Oh yeah, you need to learn how to do for yourself, and quick.
In the pop culture, words like reality, survivor, right? Think about that. Think of those black shirts they used to wear, with the dye yuppie scum, back in 1970, and the very different kind of actors and actresses, a very different impression that they had in Hollywood when they came of age, almost traumatized, not really acting up so much as boomers. For Xers, individualism wasn't a discovery. It was just a fact of life at the time they were kids, right? I mean, you were on your own. And you were expected to grow up really quick.
Yeah. That's how
and
my parents described
this is the mood of the unraveling. Maximum individualism. These are historic.
And like I said, if you was raised by one of these Gen Xers, let's say you was one of their oldest children like me, if you was the oldest child of a Gen Xer, bro, I promise you was extremely independent at a young age. Like, I already know how you live, my man, because, well, let's be real. Your parents probably took what they were taught and passed it down real quick to you. And they probably kind of lazed up with the younger siblings, let them kind of develop their own little, I don't know, like childhood. But, if you were the oldest of a Gen Xer, yeah, man, you was taking care of shit. Let's be real. And not including not just yourself, but your siblings and whatever else they needed for you to take care of. And I'm be real with you, it made you a more responsible person.
These often
wasn't taking
feature
away your childhood. It was
wild
you
market euphorias. Like in the 1990s, the dot-com bubble, I think, has gone down in history. This is also the 20s. You think about the famous decades in third turnings in American history, you're talking about decades of cynicism, bad manners, and very weak civic instincts. I'm thinking about the 1990s, the 1920s, the 1850s, the 1760s. These are wild decades where we didn't think we had any kind of civic core in America.
So the third turning is an unraveling. In many ways, the opposite of the high. Institutions are weak and distrusted, while individualism is strong and flourishing. Third turning dictates such as third turning decades such as the 90s, the 20s, and the 1850s are notorious for their cynicism, bad manners, and weak civic authority. So yeah, the 20s that led into the roaring 30s where all types of BS was going down. The 90s, the bullshit ass 90s that led into the BS that we're dealing with in the early 2000s. Let's be real. Yeah, the 90s was great, but it led to a terrible early 2000s.
And I would say The book, which
And shout out to you 90 babies like myself. Hey, what's good with y'all?
gave the best sense of direction of the 1990s, was written by Francis Fukuyama. It was called The End of History. And you read that book, and it's all the big institutions are going to fade away. All the authoritarians and dictators were going to collapse, right?
Damn.
And there'd just be individuals transacting with each other on the internet. You'd go into a Starbucks, get out your laptop, and just transact with people around the world, and all your 1,000,001 wants would be satisfied. No sense of community in that vision at all, right?
Well,
That's where we were. But history says the third turning is always followed by the fourth turning. And the fourth turning is that process. It's dark, it's violent usually, but it's where we refine community. And I think one thing that's fascinating, and in this latest book I wrote last year, The Fourth Turning is Here, is I look at how familiar we are in knowing how a society goes from community into individualism, because in our own human lifetimes we've all lived it, right? But clearly there's got to be another direction history often goes, right? It's got to go from individualism to community. None of us have any familiarity with that because it's beyond our lifetime, right? That was the last fourth turning. But hardly anyone is, almost everyone who lived through that is too old to tell us about it. But that's what I want to focus on, because we are now in the fourth turning, and its most climactic moments, we have about a decade to go. Its most climactic moments are ahead of us.
So you got high, first turning, awakening, unraveling, crisis, which is the one we're in right now.
It's the fourth turning.
The fourth turning.
It's kind of like seasons. Think of spring, summer.
And the way you have them is I saw how, I think Tony did it the right way, the way he broke it down when you and him sat down together. He broke it down by seasons, which was an easy way to see it. So high, you got World War II, lasted till mid-60s. You got 1946 to 64, which is the, 18 years that boomers produced 76 million kids, most ever in an 18-year period. Soldiers coming back from war, boom, bunch of babies are born, and then you got the Mustang. You can even predict what businesses could do if you can get this right. Then the last event of the high was JFK assassination. That's the last event. I think that's what you referred to. Then 2, awakening. That's 64 to 84. 3, unraveling. That's 84 to 2008-ish. This is the
Yeah, that makes sense. The progressive, the missionary, so the last, the GI, these are the guys that are fighting out there, the real ones, the silent generations, the one that was going through the economic depression, the boomers having all the babies after this economic depression of World War II and all that terrible things. Then the generation X, shout out to my moms and all them, mom, dad, uncles and them. And then here's us, guys. Here's most of us. Because I look at my analytics, and this is usually, the big age group here. My age or the 25 to 35 age range.
The weakening of institutions and the rise of individualism. And then crisis is now 2008 till about, you said late 20s, 2028, early 30s.
Early 2030s, yeah. We think now about 2032, 2033, it will be resolved. That will be the resolution. That'll be...
And that's funny, because low-key, the men of the Gen Z generation was pretty nomadic, moving like round and round, like, bro, this is the men that were having kids, walking out and saying, fuck it, on to the next one, moving across the road. It's like, they were pretty nomadic. And then what did they make? They made us the heroes.
Like 1946 when we're founding, everything is in concrete, right? Bretton Woods, UN, all that.
Each of these that have happened in the past, when you break it down, a lot of these have to do with a war. It leads to a war. Is one of your predictions? You said there could be a global pandemic. There was one when you guys said there could be a global pandemic. Financial challenges, we experienced it. Do you also foresee or predict that a World War III could happen the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, it could happen any year.
Could happen in the next 30 days. Yeah.
1962, as I recall. Look, let's take war first, and then I'll then I'll move on to your other thing. In the most recent book, I think in Fourth Turning, we went back. So we deal with sort of the Anglo-American saeculum. So, we go back even before America. And we go back, and most recently, we go back to the War of the Roses, the Armada. We go, this pattern is, 5 or 6 saeculum long now, right? It characterizes the modern world, sort of post-Renaissance, post-Reformation in the modern world, and it's becoming increasingly global. And I hope we come back to that, because we see now these trends happening globally, right? This trend back toward community, authority, ethnocentrism. My God, Patrick, it's around the world. Name a place in the world where you don't see it.